We have been studying Sri Aurobindo's commentary on the Kena Upanishad, where he is leading us step by step to shifting our consciousness from our current human mental state to a higher diviner state which approaches the Absolute. The text which this description covers is the second chapter of the Kena Upanishad, the first verse of which goes, "If you think that you know it well, little indeed do you know the form of the Brahman. That of it which is you, that of it which is in the gods, this you have to think out. I think it known." And the rest of the 4 verses, which we have already read a few times. But this first verse will be the point around which the present discussion will conclude. In the portion we had read last time, Sri Aurobindo said that we have to go behind the appearances. The appearance we have here is the world as we are able to see it with our physical senses and with our mind. And so our first step, therefore, must be to get behind the forms of matter. There is a reality of which this material form is a representation. We took the example of the flower, and we have the physical form of the flower, and yet we can say there is a psychological content of the flower which is its true character. Even if you break the physical form, the flower would still be that flower. And so he says, we have to get behind the forms of matter, and then the forms of life, the forms of mind, and go back to that which is essential, most real, nearest to actual entity. And so even behind the life energy imprint of the flower, even behind the mental idea of the flower form and qualities, there is something which is essential, most real, nearest to actual entity. We dwelt on these 3 terms in great detail last time. And when we have gone on thus eliminating, thus analyzing all forms into the fundamental entities of the cosmos, we shall find that these fundamental entities are really only 2. And so this process you can continue with everything that exists. Now all forms being not just physical forms, but all forms in the cosmos, and so that covers all the subtler realities. In our human experience, yes, the physical forms, we can go back to something more essential, and the life energy forms, our emotions also, we can go back to their essential, and then the mind and the idea of things, and go back into the essentials from there, what do we come to? We shall find that these fundamental entities are really only two: ourselves and the gods. And so suddenly we are surprised. Ourselves we can understand perhaps, and we will of course elaborate shortly. But what is this thing about gods? Where did they come from? To the religious mind, straight away it can say, oh yes, of course, it's the gods who are the all-powerful beings who do everything behind the scenes. But can we really come to that recognition by an introspective process? And even if we use the word gods, what exactly do we mean by that? And so that is going to be the immediate discussion ahead. Before we take the text itself, or we can just read the text and then go back to a deeper introspection. The gods of the Upanishad have been supposed to be a figure for the senses. But although they act in the senses, they are yet more than that, much more than that. They represent the divine power in its great and fundamental cosmic functionings, whether in man or in mind and life and matter in general, that is all over in the universe, in the cosmos. They represent great and fundamental cosmic functionings. Now, this great and fundamental cosmic functionings draws a resonance, reminds us of something which not from these texts of the Veda or the Upanishads, but some things which we have all perhaps met as children in our studies in school. And those are our studies of sciences, in the physics. Not this vocabulary, but fundamental cosmic something. And we have heard of them as laws. Laws of physics, or underlying essential realities, or forces, or measures. Any exploration of reality will always try to get something more essential, more true, more fundamental. And the quest of modern physics is not different. Its conclusions so far are still tentative. The deepest it has gone so far is still superficial. But what it has discovered already brings it in close alignment to the Vedic and Upanishadic explorations, which went much deeper. They do not contradict. The Vedic explorations include what current physics has discovered, but they have gone much farther. And current physics is still struggling in going deeper. So let's look at what that is from the perspective first of physics, which we would all be familiar with. In the domain of physics, where we are looking only at material movement, we call it dynamics of objects. What are the things which we can reduce everything to? So you can set up a machine, set up levers, cogwheels, and springs and everything. But when you start analyzing what is doing what, this pushes here, therefore it pushes there. Because of this distance and the spacing between them, this force is amplified, although the movement is shorter. If you start going deeper to what is essential in this whole description and changing, replacing one machine by another, you come to three quantities: space, time, and mass. Distance, seconds, and volume or weight. Everything boils down to these three measures. So these are called standard units. In all mechanics, where you have physical objects pushing and pulling on each other, you will come down to these three. And it's interesting that there are three. But this is not the whole of physics. Physics goes beyond mechanics. It can encompass the full exploration of the material universe in all its aspects of every possible experience. And there, when we start reducing all things to their fundamentals, which cannot be reduced anymore, the irreducible fundamentals, we find 7, interestingly. So the 7 are length or space, time, mass, and then current. The quantum electricity that flows is a fundamental unit. Temperature is a fundamental unit. You cannot derive it from other things. Then mole, that is the volume of something, and brightness, intensity of illumination. Now it's interesting that all physical reality and the experience of the universe can be reduced to these 7 fundamental principles. Everything else can be derived out of these. Now what is interesting is, you could, for example, replace one of these by something else, because after all they are all tied together mathematically. You could take 2 of these in a combination, replace them by 2 others from which would be derived from these, and you would still end up 7 as the fundamental. You cannot reduce the 7 to 6 or 5 or 4. You can play with them, you can make this fundamental and so that becomes secondary and so on, rearrange them, which in fact physicists do for convenience. But somehow you can never get lower than 7 in the experience of physical reality. And I'm highlighting this because 7, as you all know, is a special number in the Vedic scheme of things. There are 7 fundamental principles which form the cosmos, which form the worlds. But in the material world alone, we find somehow 7 being a fundamental reality. And what does it mean in terms of physics? From the perspective of the physical scientist, somehow space and the measurement of distance or space is a quantity which is so absolute that you cannot reduce it further. It's a reality, the sense of expansion, the sense of being able to extend and measure out that extension is something which is fundamental to our experience, to the reality of the cosmos. Where does that come from? We can't say, we don't know. But it is everywhere in the universe. It is universal, it is across time. It is eternal. So here is a great fundamental cosmic aspect of reality. Space. Similarly, time. You can use different ways of measuring. But the fact that a certain amount of time passes from here, from this point to further on, is something which you can experience but you cannot reduce to something else. The same with temperature. The same with current, the same with intensity of light or mass and things like that. Now you could consider these to be the gods of physics, if we had to use the same vocabulary. All of physics is ruled and dominated by them. They somehow are all working together to create our experience of the physical universe. They somehow enter in certain relationships which are cosmic, which are fundamental, which form this particular manner of experience of the universe. Space and time combine in a particular way. Mass, space and time relate in a particular way, and everywhere in the universe equally. Everywhere across time equally. They do not change. They are eternal, infinite, permanent, absolute, in a sense. Realities or aspects of an absolute of the cosmos, the gods. In the way they relate, in the way they behave, we can catch a relationship and formulate it, give it form. We can see how they combine together to create secondary experiences. A movement in space with the duration of time we will call speed. So the experience of something fast or slow is a combination of these 2 fundamentals. space and time. The experience of energy is a combination of mass, space and time in a particular proportion. The experience of something having great power or lesser power is again a combination of space, time and energy, space, time and mass, but in a different combination. And each of the experiences and the qualities of experiences we have in the universe can be reduced to these workings of these 7 great gods in their harmony with each other. If you take out any one of the gods, the whole universe ceases to be. And there are no others. All others are secondary deities, if we may use those terms. Now I'm using a vocabulary which science hates, to use the word gods and deities. But in terms of what they represent to the Vedic mind, they are exactly the same as what these fundamental units represent, or fundamental aspects of reality represent to science. If we were now to continue the same process of science and extend our scope beyond the merely physical, now we want to include life energy, we want to include mind, and go to the essential characteristics of life force, of energies, of emotions, of thoughts, of conceptions, perceptions. What would we discover? First, we will notice that what we have discussed so far of space and time, perhaps even of mass, extends across these levels of reality. So physically there is a space, but psychologically, emotionally, energetically, in our life force, also we have a sense of space. When you say of somebody, so and so is very close to me, so and so is, I cannot somehow manage to get close to him, he's so different. What are you describing? This person who is very close to you may be living on the other side of the planet, but you're still close emotionally. Or somebody else may be sitting next to you, or a member of your family, and you may experience a great distance in emotions, in energetic connection. So there is a sense of space even on the psychological domain, but which is very different in the way we feel and experience it. But if you go back behind, the essential idea is exactly the same, of physical space and energetic, psychological or pranic space. Essentially, there is something which is far and near. The physical space is rigid. So if you measure this distance, it stays constant unless something comes and breaks it. But in the emotional space, the distance is plastic. Somebody used to be distant to me and suddenly we have grown very close. Or I used to be so close to this person, now something has happened, he has changed, and I feel such a great distance. You see the elasticity, nothing has physically moved, and yet the sense of distance has changed. So the sense of physical space has a sense of extension which is rigid. The sense of psychological space is much more fluid. It is not fixed in physical space, and yet it has the character of spatiality. And the same with time. Just as physical time, if we have 2 clocks in 2 different parts of the house, well, they will move pretty much the same speed. But if you have 2 people sitting next to each other in their daydream, their sense of internal time may be very different. After a short daydream, I look at my watch, oh, only 5 minutes passed. The other fellow looks at his watch and says, oh my God, 5 minutes passed. And what's the difference? The psychological sense of time also is fluid. Equally, the psychological sense of mass exists. Physically, you say, this is heavy, this is light. Psychologically, you say, you are a burden to me. What do you mean by that? It's the same qualitative experience as a physical lifting, carrying on your shoulder, but it has a psychological component and much more fluid. It relates to how energetically we are aligned. The same reality which in the domain of matter becomes space, time and mass in form, and the rigidity is of form, the same reality in the domain of the energy psychologically becomes in quality of energy. Distance in quality of energy, speed of time in quality of energy, and change of quality of energy, heaviness in terms of quality of energy. Form is not rigid. It is quality of energy which survives. You shift one more level of reality, you enter the domain of mind, and you discover there also there is a sense of space, time and mass. But the quality of it is not energetic, it is idea. This is a huge idea, a grand idea. It is so encompassing, it includes everything. This is a little idea which can fit as a part of this larger idea. You can see how that happens. Your way of thinking and my way of thinking are poles apart. We are looking at reality from opposite directions. So let's say the person who has from childhood grown up in entitlement of authority and power looks at his world from the perspective of authority and power. Looks down at those who he controls. The other person who has grown up in conditions of struggle and limitation sees a very different view. We're looking at the same space but from different perspective, and our thinking, form of idea, quality and perspective is totally different. Poles apart, even diametrically opposite. We're using a vocabulary which is physical, interestingly. Or your way of thinking is so similar to mine. We think alike. Or even my way of thinking is so inclusive, it includes all these different perspectives. I'm going to digress briefly to something else, to something related to this, and we'll come back. Unfortunately, in the last 40 years or so, there is this vocabulary commonly being used among disciples of Sri Aurobindo and the Mother. It was popularized by somebody who used the word Aurobindonian thought. Now, you've heard of Jungian thought, Freudian thought, or Einsteinian thought, Newtonian thought. And so they said Aurobindonian thought. And first of all, we feel uncomfortable because the name includes Sri Aurobindo, but setting that aside, Panditji was a bit disagreeing. He did not like this use, and he explained why. He said, when you compare, let's say, Freudian thought versus Aurobindonian thought, Freudian thought is a narrow perspective on things, taking certain starting points, defining certain priorities, ignoring everything else. Newtonian perspective, similarly, Einsteinian perspective, similarly, and one is replaced by another over time, or subsumed by another. Sri Aurobindo does not do that. He gives you a perspective which includes all viewpoints, all principles, and puts them in context in relation to each other. It's not a limited viewpoint that you can compare with another limited viewpoint. So to put Aurobindonian perspective along with Freudian perspective, or whoever modern name you want to bring in, would be an error. Because if you actually look at the reality, the way Sri Aurobindo places the fullness of perspective, nothing is left out. And all of these specialized perspectives are found to be aspects, parts, components at best to this all-inclusive vision. So he discouraged, actually strongly rejected that particular form of usage. You may say at best an integral perspective, but it is not reductionist. It is an all-comprehensive view that does not leave out anything essential and includes all other narrower and limited perspectives. So this is an aside, and I come back to the theme. We have ideas or perspectives which are large versus those which are small. You can also have ideas which, now we don't use the word heavy in the same way, but which are massive, they have mass, they have content, they have density. And then ideas which are fickle, light, unsubstantial. They don't have much. And that's the quality of mass, massivity in the domain of ideas. Now, what is interesting is, we started with a physical world experience and fundamental units of the physical world experience. And we find actually these are cosmic principles going across these three worlds at least, and perhaps further up. Although the experiential quality undergoes a complete shift. Force, similarly, can be reduced in physical terms, in formula, to mass, movement in space, change in time, in combination. So the correct formula would be mass multiplied by movement in space of movement in space, that is acceleration, divided by time squared. But a combination of these three can give you the measurement of a force. Psychologically, when you look at the same thing, force also in psychological terms can be articulated in terms of the energetic mass, its movement, its change in time. It was such a powerful force that my entire state of consciousness changed. You see, the force pushed and changed my state. Equally, in physics, you could shift the priorities and define mass or movement in terms of force. Make force your center, and then the other things become variables. And in the psychological domain also, you could put force first, and then its resulting things to be secondary. But how many will we find in the psychological domain? And I don't know if I can give an answer there for sure, but I would guess, I would hazard perhaps a guess that it would not be a very large number. It would be a finite number. In the psychological domain, there are other qualities which we can look at, which do not exist in the physical. In an emotional level, for example, while we have spoken of distance, there is a quality in the distance. So and so is far away as an enemy. So and so is far away as a friend, perhaps. That quality of calling or repelling, attraction or repulsion, that quality is very distinct. Although there is an equivalent in the physical world, where also you have repulsion and attraction. But that quality of love, compassion, or an emotional resonance has a distinctiveness which we could perhaps separate out and say, this is something essential. In the domain of mind, this is clear idea. That is confused, chaotic. There's a measure of how clear it is, how revealed it is, or how dull or mixed it is. A quality of chaos or order which you can measure. Similarly, there's a physical measure you could make of chaos and order also. There is in the domain of mind a light. Oh, this is such a bright idea. This is dim. This is a dim-witted mind. What are you trying to describe there? Literally a quality of illumination, which has its equivalent physical light. Sri Aurobindo, in one of the Vedic commentaries, points out, in fact, there is only one light, and that is the spiritual light, which is the awareness of the original consciousness being aware of itself. That awareness where it is entirely lit up to itself is the original light, which then forms on other levels its equivalent experience. Now, it goes into a very different direction, but we can briefly touch upon it. You know, physically, we say, I switched on the light, now I can see. What is actually happening? I did something by which physically there was a quality of light, but I do not see the light. The light comes through a lens on my retina, is converted to electricity, goes to my brain, and a series of translations eventually in my mind producing an image. So I have actually gone through a translation from a physical experience into a mental experience where I see the light. And this is the reason why actually one can modify the experience of light by modifying the state of mind. Even one can change the experiences of colors by modifying the state of mind. It's not changing the physical reality, it is changing our registration of something that happened in the physical reality. We could go so far as to say our experience of physical reality is only through the filter of our mind. We do not actually experience the physical world directly. There's a whole series of translations through our senses. Now, when that takes place, what was it that we have registered as light? Something which already exists as a phenomenon in the mental consciousness, in which a physical thing is being represented. So the true experience of light that we see in the world is actually a quality in the mind. You see? It's not actually a physical thing. It's a physical reality being translated into mental terms that we see as light. Of course, something is happening on the physical world, but what we experience of it is a mental quality. And in the mind, suddenly everything appears, all things are in their place, and we form a schema, a picture of locations of objects in the mind. And if in the mind something is disoriented, then my picture becomes somehow blurred or unreliable. I look at the rope in the dim light, and because in my mind the energies are disturbed, I am excited, I am afraid, there's a agitation taking place in the mind's perception which appears to me as if the rope is moving. Oh, it might be a snake. And I panic even more. And you can see where the chain of logic goes. But in fact, our perception of the physical world is purely in terms of things which belong to the mental domain. Meaning, all experience of light is actually mental light to the mind's experience and a representation in mind of something happening in the physical world. So, the reality underlying is there is only one light which reflects through the whole cosmos and to different degrees which our consciousness registers. In the psychological domain, you have light or you have less light, which becomes what we call darkness. In the physical world, it is more complex. You have light and less light, but you have something called shadow. Shadow does not exist in the psychological domain by itself. If you go into the subtle worlds, you have less light or more light. But the thing like a point source of light which casts a shadow is something very specific to the physical world, where form is rigid, remember. That's the one distinguishing character of the physical world. Form is rigid. And so form can block light and cast a shadow. And therefore, the character of the divine light in the material world, in the Vedic science, is called chaya, meaning shadowy light, because it is specific to the physical world. So in this way, on each of the 7 levels of the cosmos, one can describe the characteristic of the light, in what way it is modified, in what way it is different, although they are all one single total light. Sri Aurobindo makes passing comment to this in one of his very interesting commentaries on the verses of the Rig Veda, on the first Rig of the Rig Veda in particular. I'm now showing you a picture where we're looking at the full spectrum of cosmos and then looking at fundamental realities. What would they be like? Here I will touch upon, we took this text. Now it's not the best text perhaps, but it will get us a sense of it. You will recall I read last time from one of the aphorisms where Sri Aurobindo mentions the Vedic deities and then describes them in certain ways. Be wide in me, O Varuna. Now straight away this wideness, the expanse, is the sense of space. And Varuna is that which expands out, measures out wideness. Be mighty in me, O Indra. And so here, of course, might here, Indra is the deity of the mind and represents a particular power of intensity of mind. O sun, be very bright and luminous, and you get a sense here of the illumination. O moon, be full of charm and sweetness. So the psychological quality here is stronger. Be fierce and terrible, O Rudra. The forcefulness, intensity is what we see in Rudra. Be impetuous and swift, O Maruts. And so the Maruts are these energy turning to mind awareness which is moving rapidly, and rapidity is its characteristic. Be strong and bold, O Aryama. Be voluptuous and pleasurable, O Bhaga. Be tender and kind and loving and passionate, O Mitra. See, the name Mitra in Sanskrit is commonly translated as friend. Maitri would be friendship. And what is the characteristic here? Tender and kind and loving and passionate. Now these are essential psychological qualities which, if they were not there, the universe could not be held together. Because it is the quality which is reaching out to embrace and to bring harmony and underlying unity among all things. Bring things back into their right relation. In the transition from the Vedic age to the next age, many of these deities were understood in more reduced terms. And we have to understand that the Vedic age was not just in India, it was across the earth. And so you will find in many cultures this term Mitra or a variation of it as one of the major deities, because it was one of the most beneficent and attractive to the human heart because of all the tenderness, kindness, love and passion that he brings into everything, and the harmony that is the result of his presence and action. Be bright and revealing, O dawn. Now this is different from the sun. The dawn is the transition from darkness to light, the emergence and awakening of light. O night, be solemn and pregnant. It's the quality or power of concealing and hiding, holding all in potential, and so on. Harmonize all this, all these, O Brahmanaspati. Let me not be subject to these gods, O Kali. Now here you find a quick perspective. It's not, as I said, it's not the best for this purpose. It is a wonderful prayer, but it does not always give us a very clear picture of what each of these represents, but we already get a sense of it. That there are certain cosmic principles which exist on the psychological domains, and if things on the physical domain exist in the psychological, equally things of the psychological exist in the physical. Seen from that perspective, this power which brings, let's say, which attracts things, brings them together or repels, which is a variation of the attraction, negative attraction, is represented in the physical domain, in matter, by a certain quality that every particle or object has. Most obviously seen in fundamental particles, less obviously on larger structures, or more complex on larger structures. So you take any fundamental particle, it has a particular quality of relation with other particles. Some are attracted, some are repelled. Some have as if a neutrality, meaning an attraction, repulsion, simultaneously perhaps, or dimmed attraction or repulsion. And these could be described in terms of emotions. They could be described in terms of psychological properties. An electron is attracted to a proton, or an electron is attracted to a positron, opposite charge. Why? Physics says, well, that's how it is. The Vedic perspective will say, because of the particular action of this deity who brings in that power of attraction. And so when these two particles come under each other's influence, they move in this particular way. Who creates the attraction? This deity. Who from the attraction compels them to come together? That deity. Who brings about that force? that drive, impetuousness and swiftness? Who places them in the right relation to each other when they are arranged in a complex atomic or molecular structure? The other deity who brings about and sets things in harmony. You see, the Vedic perspective, although we first understand it on psychological and spiritual levels, is actually all-inclusive across the cosmos. The full spectrum of reality is held in a single sweep from this perspective of the cosmic deities, the cosmic gods. Can you bring that? मी सकाळी एक पुस्तक इथे ठेवलं होतं टेबलावर, the hymns to the mystic fire. मी काढलं होतं. Can you just bring that? So unlike the physicists who begin with a narrow physical perspective and then cannot go further because they're stuck with some basic limited presumptions that, oh, these are just simply natural laws and natural forces and nothing more, derived from matter, the Vedic seers saw the whole because they saw from the origin, which is pure consciousness. Consciousness modifying itself to take on all these different densities, consciousness expressing these various aspects of itself, powers of itself as cosmic functionings across time and space, in eternity, in infinity, constantly, everywhere, and operating across all the levels of consciousness equally, across the worlds. And that's why this perspective is so much more profound. So when we thus look at all the reality of the universe, and now I reread from Sri Aurobindo, and when we have gone on thus eliminating, thus analyzing all forms into the fundamental entities of the cosmos, we shall find that these fundamental entities are really only two: ourselves and the gods. Of course, he puts all the gods together, and so we are two. The gods may be several, but they're still really one category, and we the other. And in the next two paragraphs, he now goes on to elaborate on both of these. First the gods, and then we. In what way are gods the fundamental entities? In what way are us, we, the individual self-aware consciousness, a fundamental entity? And so we will now explore these two, and then he discusses their relationship. And what will this do? This whole process of introspection has made us see behind the appearance of forms of matter, behind the appearance of forms of life, and even the forms of mind, to certain fundamental cosmic underlying realities, powers, aspects of the one divine. And so by dwelling on these and seeing these everywhere, we have as if cut through the deceptive appearance and come closer to the divine himself, in the way he has formed this universe and this experience of reality. There is another text of Sri Aurobindo, as I mentioned here, on the first rik of the Rig Veda, and from which I want to read, which will perhaps close this part of the discussion, and then we can move on. This is from an article titled The First Rik of the Rig Veda, in the volume called Hymns to the Mystic Fire. And here he is describing the deities from their psycho-spiritual perspective. It's top-down. Reality is top-down. Reality in the Vedic perspective is a tree with its roots above and the branches below. It's spreading downwards. You can cut the branches, but the roots you cannot touch. And they will grow back. So it's always seeing top-down. Chandra is the Devata, deity, of the Smriti or Prajna. It's a perception of consciousness without going into detail. Surya of the Satyam, the truth consciousness. Indra of the understanding and Manas, the sense mind. Vayu of the Sukshma Prana, the subtle life force. Mitra, Varuna, Aryama, Bhaga are the four masters of the emotional mind or character. You see, these are facets of our emotional being. Brihaspati of the Sahaituka Chitta, or tapas of knowledge, causeless consciousness or tapas of knowledge. Brahma of the Sahayituka Sat, the causeless self-existence. Agni of the Sahayituka Tapas, the causeless intensity. And then Sri Aurobindo writes, it's a very quick cryptic text. This is only an indication. The various characteristics and energies of the gods are best developed by an examination of the Veda itself. And then he explains, what are they doing? Now, unlike physics, which began matter upwards and so had already a reductionist view, unlike physics, the gods are conscious beings. In physics, space, time, energy, mass, all the other, whatever we may choose as fundamental principles or experiences of reality, are just there, mechanical, in a sense, dead. They just happen to be there. That's why the physics starts the world with the idea of one gigantic machine and then goes deeper to essentialities. But very quickly in the quantum mechanics we discover it's not just a mechanical machine. There is a huge content of awareness involved. Somehow the quality of awareness of us modifies our perception and even the result of experiments. And so there seems to be some kind of an underlying awareness, even an underlying what they call non-local reality, meaning things across great distances in space and time are somehow connected, suggesting already the Vedic deity which harmonizes everything, holds everything together in right relation. And they're glimpsing these, but they're not able to see that these are fundamental powers, and they're not able to see that these are conscious powers. When you look top down, everything originates in pure consciousness of the Chit. And so everything which emerges as powers, aspects, functions, energies, principles, whatever name one give to it, they are conscious. And how conscious? Not just an individual, cosmically conscious. Equally conscious everywhere in the cosmos, across space, across time. That's why they are great gods. So, the gods, what are they doing? Because they are conscious, everything they do is with an intention, with consciousness, with awareness, with a sense of where they are going or why they are doing. Although each fulfills his role, he knows where that role goes and why, what it serves in the overall scheme. So, the gods strive to function perfectly for the Lord or Yajna, the Isha, master of the Adhara or sevenfold medium of manifestation. So each god is serving the one divine who is the master of this sevenfold manifestation. So the Adhara normally we use to mean only the physical or individual form, which is the foundation. But here the Adhara is the entire cosmos and sevenfold. And they are all serving the master in this Adhara. This is the manifestation, the base in which the divine manifests. The Titans, now here comes an introduction to a different idea. These are also powerful deities. The Titans or deities, equally divine, try to upset this perfect functioning. Now for a moment, we won't go too much in detail, but you say, how can they be equally divine when they are upsetting the functioning? They're equally divine because they're equally powers and aspects of the divine consciousness in the manifestation, serving a purpose. And their purpose is to try to upset this perfect functioning. Their office is to disturb that which is established in order to push man below or give him an opportunity of rising higher by breaking that which was good and harmonious in itself, but imperfect. I see the role they play. The moment there is something good which is formed, something which is harmonious which is formed, but not perfect, what happens? We will get stuck in it. I am so comfortable in my life. I wish nothing will change. And then they come and give you a knock. Either push you down or give you a chance to move forward, upward. But you cannot stay on status quo. I will see this characteristic so common in life, especially today when things are moving at a fast pace. You cannot stay static. When you stay static, the world moves forward and you find yourself left behind. Either you fall back or you move forward. You cannot stay in the same place. There is no such thing anymore. And their role is to do that. Now, if you look at it this way, it's a divine role. It is a critical component of evolution. In fact, if you go deep into the whole logic of evolution, evolution can lead most rapidly to good if there is a force which is constantly pushing backwards to eliminate that which refuses to move forward. Now imagine, let's say you take the principle which we are familiar with of the survival of the fittest. It's a very narrow reductionist principle, but still, in evolution, things which are more fit will survive. But if that is the only truth, then unless there are great battles and unless there are great conflicts, you will not get a chance to eliminate or allow others to survive by eliminating those who are not worthy of survival, isn't it? And without needing battles, well, it comes in other forms: disease, illness, accident, various forms. But the forces basically are trying to bring a chaotic impulse to push down. Or you have a choice. Either you get pushed down or you make an effort and push up. And then they leave you. They don't bother you. If you keep moving forward, then they don't come to bother you. If your moving forward has got stuck in a narrow groove, then they come to bother you, to push you off your groove because you're missing a part which is necessary to your completeness, to your widening, to your other possibilities, multifacetedness. So you see how they are also divine, equally divine. Their office is to disturb that which is established in order to push man below or give him an opportunity of rising higher by breaking that which was good and harmonious in itself but imperfect. So they ensure that you are pushed towards perfection rapidly. Isn't that an aspect of the divine will also finally? Except to our view, it is the reverse aspect. And then he says, and in any case, to render him dissatisfied with anything short of perfection and drive him continually to the infinite. So the dissatisfaction, I have achieved so much, but that comes from, that's their role. To always point out something lacking against which whatever great achievement I might have, I realize this is not enough. I need to do something more. And drive him continually to the infinite, either by the Uttama Gati to Vasudeva, or if he will not have that, by the Adhama Gati to Prakriti. So there are two ways of moving forward. They will push you to move forward, but there are two ways. The Uttama, that is superior or higher way, higher Gati has the sense of speed but movement forward. Either the higher or the Adhama, downward. What is the difference? The first is towards the divine, Vasudeva. Here he uses the word Vasudeva, which is the aspect of the divine of immanence. He lives in all things. It is the divine who lives in all things. Either you begin to recognize the divinity in all things and thus grow in closeness to the divine, or the inferior or lower way to Prakriti, which is the mechanical nature. You now get embedded in your nature, in the habits of your nature. You're a victim of your nature, except that nature herself is pushing you through pain, through struggle, through suffering. Look at two different people. There's a saying in Sanskrit which we used to be taught, suvachana, meaning a good saying. Who seeks knowledge and who seeks pleasure. What is that word? No. I'll translate it. The seeker of knowledge does not enjoy pleasure. And for the seeker of pleasure, where is there a question of knowledge? It's a very simple saying. And here you get a sense. You will see in life, you go to a school or you go to any environment, you'll find those who are constantly striving to grow in knowledge, in capacity, in awareness, and so on. And there are those who say, well, why chase after more? I just want to enjoy. And they choose to settle down and wallow in the lowest common denominator of whatever their sense of enjoyment. And generally that tends to quickly fall back to the body sensation and indulgence in sensational pleasure. Notice where they go. They drift quickly into group behavior, collective behavior, which is mechanically driven, driven by instinct, driven by pleasure. But what is giving you pleasure? An instinctive drive. If you look at a scene of people in a disco dance, they are excited, agitated, but when you look at the mass, you do not see a person. You see a whole collective jumping, driven by what? The punch of the music, the violence or the beats. And I've seen often in certain public functions, when the beaty music starts, these people start nodding their head, shaking their body, their legs start moving. That is the way of Prakriti. I am not choosing it. The music compels. The excitement seizes. The attraction pulls. I am a victim. And you accept to do that. You accept to do that. And it's a legitimate way also for nature. But it is the inferior path because it's often accompanied by pain. Pleasure is always accompanied by its contrast of pain and various other issues. And it is often a painful passage of awakening until at some point when they break out of it because of the inner being pushing or other circumstance, somebody discovers, well, through the pleasure of whatever he was taking, he has now become addicted, perhaps alcoholic. When he breaks out of it, suddenly now his mind is so much clearer and he looks at that way of life and says, oh, I wasted so many years. And a very different drive emerges, which is closer to the Uttamagati, to Vasudeva. Or if he will not have that, if he will not choose, then the fallback is by the Adhamagati to Prakriti. So one is a choice, the other is a fallback. Either way you will move forward. And that is the role of the Daityas. Now if there are these two different, let's say, groups of cosmic deities, the Vedic Aryans sought to overcome the Daityas or Dasyus by the aid of the gods. Afterwards, the gods had themselves to be overcome in order that man might reach his goal. Very interesting. So at first you take help of all these powers because they are there to help you, but at some point you have to disengage even from that because they represent already an aspect or a particular form and expression of the one who is even beyond. And you must go straight to that. So I wanted to read this text to put in context what we have been reading. In the integral yoga, just to complete this discussion, the focus is not on taking the help of the deities. The focus is on the mother of all these gods. She who is the divine mother of whom these are aspects and powers, and in that sense even cosmic children, she includes all of them. And so when we enter directly in relation with her, invoke her to enter us and work in us, her single entry includes all the deities and their action, but in perfect harmony. When you take each of the deities in separation and engage with them, then there's the whole struggle to harmonize them and then to get free of them. But when you enter directly in relation with the Divine Mother, her action within you includes simultaneously all the multiple facets of all the deities, perfectly harmonized, modulated exactly as necessary for you at that moment in that situation. And because she herself is also the transcendent Divine Mother as well as the universal, she leads you all the way to her own greatest heights. And the whole journey is one consistent single movement of deepening our relationship with the Divine Mother. But right now we understand where this text is taking us. Become aware of this underlying reality. Now we can know them as gods or simply as aspects of the one divine. That is real, behind the appearances. What's the other thing that's real? You. The other entity Oh, sorry, we finished the text. So, I'm sorry, I missed the text. So, we come back to the text we are reading. So, the gods, they represent the divine power in its great and fundamental cosmic functionings, whether in man or in mind and life and matter in general. So, the great and fundamental cosmic functionings. They are not the functionings themselves, but something of the divine which is essential to their operation and its immediate possessor and cause. So we cannot say that the Varuna is space. But Varuna is that particular quality which allows for that expansion of consciousness by which we can know and experience and enjoy the sense of space. And so on for all the deities. And they are the immediate possessor and cause. If not for that particular aspect of the divine wanting to extend and expand, there could not be the experience of space in the cosmos. They are, as we see from other Upanishads, positive self-representations of the Brahman leading to good, joy, light, love, immortality, as against all that is a dark negation of these things. So these are the deities are always pushing you forward. And it is necessarily in the mind, life and senses and speech of man that the battle here reaches its height and approaches to its full meaning. Now you see why it was important to read that text where he discusses the opposite side of the daityas. Here Sri Aurobindo is not going too much into that. He simply speaks of the dark negation of these things. But those also are powers. And within us, between these light and dark powers, is the battleground. What are the functions in us where this battleground is most obviously, most mature and complete in development? Mind, life, senses, and speech. Now suddenly, the structure of the Kena Upanishad becomes so obvious. And you can see the depth of it. Why did the Kena take these four as the link points between the human consciousness and the divine consciousness? Why did it start the first verse with the questions of what makes these four be effective? Because these are the focal points, the battleground, where this struggle of the upward and downward tendencies of evolution are most mature and rich and complete, reaches its height. The battle reaches its height and approaches to its full meaning. In what way on each of these four we will look at next time. And then we complete the paragraph. The gods seek to lead these to good and light. The titans, sons of darkness, seek to pierce them with ignorance and evil. Behind the gods is the master consciousness, of which they are the positive cosmic self-representation. So now we are looking at the gods and the struggle between the gods and the titans, and behind the gods is the master consciousness, of which they are the cosmic self-representation. And so we are looking at the cosmos as the form and body of God in their functioning, but the divine himself is behind that. Now we are left with three things: the divine whom we seek to realize, the gods in between who represent the divine in the cosmos, and then we, which is the other essential fundamental entity. And the relationship between these three is what becomes the rest of the exploration. We will pause here for a while, because next Sunday I will be out of station. We will have the Friday class as usual though. And for all of you, there's a general invitation to drop by on the 14th, which is Panditji's birthday. We will have a special prayer in the morning at 6 o'clock, for which you're welcome. Otherwise, any time during the day you may drop by to have prasad. For those who are watching the webcast, the morning prayer will be webcast also live, and it will stay on for 24 hours and then be removed. And we will continue this particular text. ध्यान करतो नुसतं. करायचं आहे video. So in that case, on the 13th evening, at 6:30, we will have a video of one of Panditji's talks. And that's on Tuesday evening, for which also you're welcome. And we will continue this passage in July, after I return. And our classes will resume from the 28th of July. So until then, we can dwell upon these ideas and perhaps even explore in a kind of an introspection how these things relate to us, reread these texts, go deeper into them. For those who are coming here for the classes, we will have video recordings of some other talks which will be of interest, which will be there on instead of these classes, so that we can continue the mood of the study. And we will continue these afterwards. Friday class as usual. We can meditate on this for a few minutes. Just as an idea, when you look at any object from this description, recall these are all full of the action of the gods. So we complete the discussion with flower. We saw so many things earlier. What makes flower possible to be expressed as flower is the working of the cosmic gods. What makes flower fade is the negative working of the deities. But eventually everything in the cosmos exists in form and expression because of the constant working of the gods who strive to manifest the one divine in all his infinite potential. And so that can be a theme of meditation for us on everything.